Welcome everybody to the Chess Lab. In today's video I want to show you a game between Alireza Firouzja and Baadur Jobava, a very strong grandmaster from Georgia. The game starts with e4, c6, the Caro-Kann defense, d4, taking control over the center, and d5. Now, you have three options here. You can push the pawn to e5, this is called the advanced variation. You can take the pawn on d5, this is called the exchange variation. Or you can defend this pawn with knight c3 or knight d2. In this game, Alireza decided to play e5. And the idea is that white has more space and basically claim to have an advantage. Black plays bishop f5. And this is one of the main ideas, if not the main idea, of the whole Caro-Kann defense. And the idea is that black wants to play e6 to develop this dark square bishop and the knight and castle, but he wants to play e6 only after having played bishop f5, so that the bishop is out of this pawn chain. So that's the strategical idea. The negative consequence of this idea is that the bishop is not anymore on c8, so the b7 pawn is undefended, and also this bishop on f5 may be attacked in the future via g4, h4, knight f3, knight h4, and ideas like that. Usually white plays bishop d3 to exchange this bishop. So the Caro-Kann is a great opening used by many world champions, but is also sharp. For example, in this position, another option is to play c5 as black. This is, I don't know if you are interested, but this is what I usually play, and I like to play c5 with another approach. But okay, bishop f5 is the main move, so it's considered best. And now knight f3. Knight f3 has a simple idea. Alireza wants to play bishop e2, short castle, and claiming that he has the advantage thanks to the advantage in space, thanks to this pawn on e5 and this pawn on d4. And also, this bishop, as I said, is a little bit misplaced. And so maybe ideas like knight h4 to win this bishop and winning the bishop pair are possible. So e6, closing the chain, opening up the dark square bishop, and the light square bishop is already out. And now, it's very important that you know this, the main plan for black is to play c5. Because the advantage for white is the advantage in space thanks to those pawns, and the big disadvantage for black is that he has less space. What does it mean to have less space? This game is going to show you. So c5 is the main idea, to attack this structure and also to allow knight c6, for example, or the other knight to come to c6, but we'll see. So bishop e2, again, the idea is just to castle and claim to have a strategical long-term advantage. So knight e7. This knight e7 move is a little bit weird. Maybe c5 was a little bit more in the spirit of this position. And the problem with knight e7 is that this bishop now cannot move. So your basic idea of just castling is not possible. And also c5 is much more hard because the bishop is not defending the c5 square anymore. So knight e7 is already weird. It's not bad, it's not losing absolutely, but it's weird. So just castle and h6. And already before this move h6, you see what does it mean to have less space. Look at white pieces. White can play a bunch of moves. Bishop e3, bishop f4, bishop g5, knight c3, knight d2, I don't know, knight g5, even knight h4 to attack the bishop, bishop d3 to challenge the bishop, c4, rook e1. All the moves that I drawn are not necessarily good, but gives you the idea that white can play a lot of moves. Instead, black cannot play a lot of moves. For example, this bishop cannot move. This bishop has really few squares. This knight probably can go to d7 because already a6 is weird, it's only one move. This knight, where is this knight going? If the knight goes to g6, then this bishop on f5 really is almost trapped. So, you know, Black needs to be careful. Having less space, that means that you have less space for your pieces. And in the opening, that's the phase of development, this can be very, very dangerous. So h6, the idea is that white now, if plays knight h4, there is bishop h7, keeping the bishop there. So knight bd2, and again, this shows you the versatility of white. Instead of playing knight c3, Alireza prefers knight d2. And the idea is, there are two ideas. The first idea is that you want to keep open the possibility of playing c3, and this is usually a good strategy to keep this pawn structure very strong. And also another idea is to go on b3. And from b3, you're basically controlling very good this square c5. And remember what's the plan for black? Exactly, playing c5. So you are allowing black not to play c5. It's harder. Knight d7, maybe with the idea of playing c5. And now knight b3. And if c5, black risks to lose a pawn. And also, if you play c5, you weaken the b5 square, so bishop b5 may become a problem, pinning this knight that defends this pawn. So, you know, bishop h7, this really shows the lack of space of black, and a4. Now, in the center, white is dominating. On the king side, white has no problem at all, so now white tries to create some weaknesses on the queen side, maybe playing a5, a6, and if you allow that, if you take, then those pawns are weak, and if you don't take, if you push, then white has a very strong pawn on a6. So a6 by black, preventing a5, a6, but at the same time weakening this square, and so all of this diagonal. Bishop d2. And immediately, as you can see, there is the idea of playing bishop a5 to use this diagonal, or maybe bishop b4 to using this diagonal. And notice the square on d6, is extremely weak. Imagine a bishop going to d6. Fantasy, right? We'll see if this is fantasy. So queen c7. Queen c7 is a logical move because it prepares c5. And now white wants to stop c5 and at the same time improving his position, so rook c1. And now c5 was not played, because if you play c5, trying to free all the pieces, knight c6, bishop e7, that's why c5 is so important. But if you play c5 right now, well, white can take the pawn and then play c4, but c4 immediately is also a possibility. And now basically the c file is opening, because you are going to take, or they are going to take you, the c file is opening, but is opening in favor of white, because white has a rook to the c file, whereas black has a queen, so the queen must lose tempi, and white will win the control over the c file in the end. So c5 was not played, but rook d8 is played. And rook d8 is not a pretty move, is a move that is very hard to understand, and basically is not the greatest of the moves. So bishop a5, that's also allowed, because now the bishop is basically skewering the queen and the rook, but luckily black can stop it. There are two ways to stop this problem. One is knight b6, the other one is b6. The problem with knight b6 is now your knight is pinned, and this is terrible, and probably there are some tactical motifs that exploit this. So b6 is played, and now after you play a pawn, you have to know this, you weaken some squares. After b6 is played, a6 and c6 are weak, because the pawn was defending those squares, and now is not anymore. So after bishop b4, that is looking at d6, the pawn on a6 is under attack. So black is forced to play a5, and bishop d6 is allowed. Queen b7, trying to keep all the pawns, and now queen d2. In this position, for example, it's clear that white is better. More space, more active pieces, but Usually we struggle to understand what to do, and Alireza show us a great idea. In this position, the knight on b3 is well placed because it prevents c5. The knight on f3 is not the best knight in the world, but is not even in a bad situation. The bishop is also well placed because it looks at the queen side and potentially to the king side. The bishop on d6 is also extremely well placed, but there is a problem in white development, and this is the rooks are not connected. Look at them. So Alireza decided to play queen d2 to connect the rooks and also improving the position of the queen, because now the queen is pressuring a5 a little bit, is pressuring the king side also, and so that's just an improvement of the position. And that's what you want to do when you have more space in your own games, just improve your position. Why? Because your opponent doesn't have counterplay. So, knight c8, and now the bishop is under attack 2 times and defended only once, so bishop takes f8. And now I ask you, how do you want to take back this bishop? With the king, with the rook, with the knight? What do you think? Alright, I hope you thought a little bit, and the best move, or at least the move that Jobava plays, is knight takes f8. And the idea is that if you take with the rook or with the king, you lose the right to castle. So knight takes f8. And now knight e1. The idea of knight e1 is to play knight d3 to prevent even more c5, but in the game, we'll see, even to go to f4. Because another idea of black, since this structure is so strong for white, is to play f6 to attack it. But with a knight on f4, this pawn is hanging if you move the f7 pawn. And that's why this is a nice maneuver. And also from f4, let me remove some arrows that are very annoying. Okay, so from f4 you may be looking at h5, and from h5 g7 is weak, and if you play g6 then f6 is weak. So you know, all those ideas are allowed to the advantage in space that white has. Knight e7, knight d3, knight d7, and now black is finally ready to castle. Knight f4, as you can see, castle, and rook f e1. I didn't commentate those moves because they are quite logical and both players are just trying to improve the position. Basically, black was forced to put those knights here because those are right now the best squares for those knights, and then to castle. So those 3 moves are understandable. And basically white just improves the rook, the knight, and tries overall to improve the position. Rook c8, always looking at this c5 break, and now c3. The idea of c3 is preventing, or not preventing, but let's see, looking into the future for c5, because after c5 attacking this pawn is already defending it, so you can think about something else. And now rook c7. Now the idea of black is probably to play rook c8, c5, opening up the c file, exchanging all the rooks, and basically call it a day. It's a draw. Black suffer from the opening, and being able to draw will be okay. And in this position, Alireza played a very aggressive move that changed the course of the game. And if you want to stop the video and try to find this move, you are allowed to do so, feel free to do it. Alright, and the move is g4. And g4 is an extremely aggressive move, preparing ideas like g5, maybe supporting with h4, and basically saying to black, you are trying to free yourself over to the queen side, but I'm going to kill you first on the king side. I know it sounds a little bit like a novel, but it's how it is. Queen b8. Okay, queen b8 is a little bit of a mysterious move. Maybe the idea is to go back to defend. I'm not really sure about this move, but okay, queen b8. And now queen e3. And again, what is the difference between black and white in this position? When black does a move, you don't understand it, because black is the one under pressure. Instead, when white does a move that you don't understand, like queen e3, you can always say, well, white is trying to improve his position, for example, going to g3 and stuff like that, and since he has more space and more control over the center, he is allowed to do those moves. So whatever white plays is good, basically. Queen d8, again trying to improve the position, I assume, or maybe even after this knight moves, looking at the king side. That may be a more reasonable idea. And h3. And again, this proves what I just said. Whatever white plays is good. Improving the position, supporting g4 a little bit more, and what can black do? King h8, because, you know, maybe in the future, king h2, rook g1, attacking to the g file, so the king just moves away. Knight d2. The knight also wants to come to the king side, maybe to support some push, or going into h4 or whatever. And c5. Yeah, at this point, basically, after the move knight d2, black realizes that if he doesn't do anything, he's just getting crashed on the king side, so c5 is played. But after c5, remember what I said, after you move a pawn, you create some weaknesses, and in this case, this square is weak. So immediately Alireza played bishop b5, putting pressure on the d7 knight. Knight c6, finally the c6 square after c5 is free for the knight, and now king h2. Alireza wants to put a rook on the g file, since it's more useful than on the e file, and start to put pressure on the king side. And now c takes d4. What do you do? If you don't take back the pawn, you are just down a pawn, and black free himself. And if you take with the queen, your queen falls because the knight defends d4. So c takes d4 is the only move, but is a good move, keeping the central pawn structure intact. That's very important. And now knight b4. Rook takes c7. You want to remove the rook from the c file for black, so now he has only the queen. And now a very interesting move, queen c3. And what's the idea of Alireza? The idea is that if black plays queen takes c3, you are forced to play b takes c3. First of all, your pawn structure improves once more, but I have a question for you. Where is this knight going? That's a problem. You cannot go back because there is the bishop. You cannot go on d3 because two pieces are controlling the square, so where are you going to go? Maybe you go on c2, maybe you go on a2. If you go on a2, well, it may be very, very dangerous. Knight e2, for example, rook a1. So knight c2 maybe is a little bit better because you are defended by the light square bishop, but oh, I just noticed there is a knight under attack. So after you play rook c1, you have to defend this knight, and this knight is under heavy pressure. So yeah, I don't think it works because two of your pieces are under attack. Yep, that's unfortunate. So okay, playing queen c3 is very, very dangerous. That's why rook c8 was played. And now black has a threat. He has a threat of playing queen takes c3, b takes c3, and rook takes c3, just winning a pawn. So rook c1. And now again, if white plays queen takes c3, rook takes c3, the rook is under attack. If you move the rook, white wins the control over the c file, so rook takes c3 is basically forced, b takes c3, and now two of your pieces are under attack, the knight here and the knight here. And this time I think that white wins a piece straight away, because the knight on b4 doesn't have a move that comes with tempo attacking a rook, because the rooks are not anymore on the board. So that would be winning for white. So bishop c2. This is quite a complicated move and weird, but actually is quite simple if you look at it with a little bit of logic. So the point is to interrupt the communication between the rook and the queen. And so to renovate the threat of queen takes c3, b takes c3, and rook takes c3. But Alireza has an easy way to go away with it, and the way is queen g3. And the idea of queen g3 is that now this bishop is pinned, and basically you are looking at the king side. And the idea is to play g4 with a pawn. So queen d8. Queen d8 has the idea that you unpin your bishop that now can move, and also you are controlling the g5 square, so g5 is not allowed. Now this is quite an instructive moment. White wants to play g5, but thanks to this queen this is not allowed. So you want to do in this situation what is called removing the defender. The defender of the g5 square is this queen, so you want to remove this queen from the control of g5. And how do you do it? There is a move from white that you can do. Try to find it. Alright, the move is bishop takes d7, and the queen is overloaded because he is defending d7 and g5. So queen takes d7 is forced, and now g5. And now there is a big problem because white is threatening g takes h6, g takes h6, and your pawn structure is terrible. So black captures, h takes g5, and queen takes g5. And now, as you can see, the black king is in a very dangerous spot. Rook g1 is coming, knight f3 is coming, and you will have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces against only the king. And usually if you have 2 pieces into the attack more than your opponent has into the defense, that's very good. And in this case would be 4-0, because the king of course is not considered a defensive piece in a middle game, but is considered the piece that you have to defend. So queen d8, offering an exchange of queens. And now I have a question for you. When you are attacking and when you have a better position, do you want to exchange queen? Yes or no? The answer is no, you don't want to exchange pieces, and queen especially, because you want to keep the attack going. It's going to be much easier for your opponent if you exchange the queens. So queen h5 is played, declining the offering of the trade, and now king g8. Knight f3, and as you can see, 1, 2, 3 pieces against the lonely king, and g6. Now, before you go crazy and start screaming, oh my goodness, you can play knight takes g6, f takes g6, and queen takes g6, calm down and look at the old board, because there is bishop takes g6, so you lose the game, because the g6 square is defended not only by the pawn, but also by the bishop from the distance. So be careful before sacrificing stuff. And you can even consider playing rook takes c2 first, because after, let's say, knight takes c2, you never have anymore a rook that can come to the g file, so your attack is much weaker. For example, knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and black just escapes. So yeah, now black escapes. So be careful in going into crazy sacrifices. When you have a better position with the attack, slow down. So the last move was g6, and Alireza played rook g1. That's much better than a sacrifice, because now the pawn is pinned, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces against 1. This is already strategically completely winning for white. Knight c6, trying to regroup the knight in a more defensive square. Queen h6, and already there are threats like knight g5, queen h7, and queen f7 mate. And maybe now there are ideas of sacrifice, or maybe h4, h5 to take on g6 and then just crush black. Queen f8, again, I say the question again, do you want to trade queens or not? I hope you learned not, of course, so queen h4, with the idea of maybe going queen f6, rook g4, rook h4, rook h8 mate, so queen g7, and knight h5. Remember that the pawn is always pinned, even in this situation. If the pawn takes, the queen falls, so the queen is under attack, you have to move it. Queen h6. And now the knight is pinned. You may consider moves like knight f6 check, but the king just defend, and it's a little bit complicated to push through. You prefer to have this square for the queen. So rook g4 is played, and now rook g4 is a very good move. You may say, I don't understand it. Well, it's hard, I didn't understand it immediately either, but the idea is to play queen f6, leaving this knight, and if black plays queen takes knight, you have rook h4, and basically you are threatening mate and the queen, and if the queen takes your rook, your queen takes back, and basically white wins. So that's the idea. A little bit an advanced tactics, but it's understandable. So after rook g4, king f8 is played, and now queen f6. And nothing changed actually, because if you play queen takes h5, well, of course, if you take with a pawn, you just lose the queen immediately, so not even consider that. But if you take with the queen, there is rook h4. And if the queen moves away, there is mate, so the only move is taking, and then you can take with the knight or with the queen. And even though it seems like the position have simplified, the queen and the knight against rook, knight and bishop is basically a queen against rook and bishop, and that will be winning for white quite easily, at least at their level, you know, grandmaster level. So knight d8 and rook h4. And this idea of just moving the knight and going here to deliver mate is now a big threat. So king g8, and the idea of king g8 is after the knight moves, no matter where, to play queen g7. For example, I don't know, knight f4, you play queen g7 and you stop this mate and you save the queen, so that's the idea. But now after king g8 comes knight g5, and now knight g5 comes with a terrible threat that I don't want to tell you, because that's the puzzle that I'm gonna ask you to solve. And now bishop d1 is played, and right now Alireza played a move, a very good move, a great move, and black resigned the game. So I give you the chance to stop the video and try to see the move. Alright, the move is queen takes d8 check. Yeah, and black resigned. Why did black resign? For tactical reason. There's not anything crazy here, just a queen sacrifice. After rook takes d8, which is forced, there is knight f6 check. And now if you move the king away from the queen, white is going to take the queen and then being up a piece. So the only move here is king g7, and now rook takes h6. And now if black does nothing, again he is just up a piece, so black needs to take. But now again, if you didn't find the move previously, that was quite hard, you have the chance of finding the move now. This is a very basic tactic, but maybe some of you are more beginner-like, so you have the chance to find the move now. Alright, and you have to always see that a king and a rook in a position like that are both undefended, so the move here is knight f7, and this is a fork. And so after, for example, actually, yes, there is only one move, king g7, knight takes d8, in the end, white is up a piece. The combination started back here, when Alireza played knight g5. He saw all of this. And after bishop d1, there is the combination. So I hope you like this video and you like this game, but most importantly, I hope you learn from this game. I want to just tell you something real quick. After e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5, knight f3, e6, bishop e2, and knight e7. The problem in this kind of positions and in this kind of openings for black is that you lack in space. So if you play with the black pieces and you want to play against e4 and you want to play the Caro-Kann, you have to know your theory and be ready to maybe suffer a little bit and be ready to play the move c5 as soon as possible. Here black decided to delay it a little bit, but it was better to play it immediately. And if you're playing someone that is very strong like Alireza, you can get in trouble like that. And if you are playing against someone who is lacking in space, well, use this game from Alireza's point of view to learn how to deal with your opponent having less space. So I hope you like this video. If you like those kind of videos where I analyze the game in a little bit more detailed way, consider leaving a like, consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching and enjoy your chess.